So, everybody, one thing that happened this week that's been the source of a lot of speculation and theorizing on many different sides, a missile landed in Poland, which was strange because we originally heard that it was a Russian missile, but then NATO said, no, this wasn't a Russian missile. We believe this was a Ukrainian misfire. So that's a little strange. That's because if you look at a map, I wish I should have pulled up a graphic, but Russia is to the east of Ukraine. Poland is to the west of Ukraine.
Yeah.
So if it was a Ukrainian defense missile shooting at a Russian incoming missile, you'd think they kind of maybe shot it the wrong way. That's a little, I mean, I don't want to say it's a false flag or anything, but unless they have Wile E. Coyote running their air defense, then that's a little suspicious. That it would fly the opposite direction.
I mean, if you see the debris they recovered, it did say Acme on the side.
Yeah, well, maybe that's a hint. That's a hint.
Yeah.
Because it seems
I
don't know.
There was like a big grabby arm with a hammer on the end.
Yeah. I mean, it's starting to look like Zelensky maybe a little full of, we're not allowed to say what we, why don't we just hear from him? Let's just let him speak for himself.
How do you say it? How do you say World War III?
Yeah. I'm not sure. Let's just let Zelensky talk for himself. I don't think we can get thrown off the air for that. Let's just hear what he has to say. Let's hear him out.
Corrupt comedian.
Our eyes are open. We're here to listen, not to talk.
Panama Papers.
Let's hear him talk about the Russian missile attack. Well, see, it worked. He brainwashed me. I said Russian missile attack. See? So there you go. Happy YouTube.
That's how it works.
That's how it works.
You're turning into a pod person.
Yeah, exactly. Right. I'm becoming a pro. Yeah. Getting good at this, everybody. All right, let's hear what he has to say.
А сьогодні російські ракети ударили по Польщі, по території нашої дружньої країни. Загинули люди. Прийміть, будь ласка, співчуття від усіх українських братів. Скільки разів Україна говорила про те, що нашою країною держава-терорист не обмежиться. Польща, держави Балтії – це питання часу, коли б російський терор пішов далі. Треба поставити на місце терориста.
All right, so there you have him saying, obviously, this was a Russian attack. And obviously the significance, I mean, most of you guys know this already, but the significance of Russians firing a missile into Poland, if that's in fact what they did.
Say, as somebody with some knowledge of film theory, this is very Leni Riefenstahl, the way that they shot this, right? It's
I see what you're saying.
Powerful and dominant, and they shot up at him that way.
Yes.
It looks like a half-assed attempt to make him look powerful.
Yeah, and for those who, a more mainstream reference would be the Inglourious Bastards movie. You know, when they have the big premiere at the end, and you see the framing of those shots in the Nazi propaganda film. That's what he's talking about there. And you're right, the framing was just like that. But anyway, obviously, the significance of Russia firing a missile into Poland, if in fact they did, is that Poland is a NATO country, and so that would give you, excuse me, what was it? Sorry, the RSV flu's going around. It kicked in just in time there. I don't know, but yeah, that would be a pretty significant thing if they did that. So, as it turns out, however, NATO has said that actually they believe that this missile was a Ukrainian missile that was errantly fired to defend against a Russian missile. Again, how they were that far off, if you look at a map, really difficult to see, right? I mean, for all the billions of dollars we're giving them, they should be able to fire it a little straighter than, to miss in the opposite direction by whatever it is, 900 miles. But anyway, like I said,
well, with the what are we sending them, another $67 billion? Maybe they'll get it straightened out.
Yeah, maybe they'll buy themselves a compass to make sure they're firing it in the correct direction. With that money, I think that would be a good investment. You can get those pretty cheap. I think Raytheon will sell you a special militarized compass for about $13.5 million.
You know what I hate when those commercials come on in the middle of the night where they show like children who can't have no sense of direction without compasses, and they want you to donate. Right. This is a tragedy that you can prevent for only 50 cents a day
Right.
Look at these children having no idea which way north is.
Exactly. But anyway, we want to vindicate ourselves a little bit here, because we know we're going to get criticized for questioning whether this Zelensky guy is telling the truth about where this missile came from, because he still insists, as of today, by the way, that no,
I know
this was not a Ukrainian missile. He is not giving on this. All right, but let me just put this up here because this is interesting. So this was on the 15th. So this was a few days ago. This was sort of released around the same time that video was. Had a call with President Andrzej Duda, I hope I'm getting that name right, expressed condolences over the death of Polish citizens from Russian missile terror. We exchanged available information and are clarifying all the facts. All of Europe and the world must be fully protected from terrorist Russia. Now, if you notice, underneath there, Zelensky got a little fact-checked there on social media.
Yep.
Way to go, Elon. Doing your job over there.
Yep.
Readers added context. They thought people might want to know. The context was Poland says missile that hit it was Ukrainian stray. Isn't that a fascinating graphic? Isn't that just a fascinating graphic? This guy is the new deity of the libs who want to censor people for not telling the truth on social media and things like that. Here you have a guy who's clearly trying to, whether this was a false flag or not, he's clearly trying to build the case for military intervention on the part of NATO, which would be, yes, we can say this out loud without getting canceled, World War III. That's clearly what he's trying to get going here. And he's fact-checked on Twitter saying, no, actually, that missile is not Russian missile terror. That, according to Poland and the rest of NATO, was a Ukrainian stray. Yep. Pretty interesting stuff. I can only use the word interesting if we want to keep our show. But I think it's interesting. That's interesting, isn't it? Isn't it interesting how this man of unimpeachable character is this wrong about this? I think that's interesting. Because we know he's a hero, and we know he would never, do anything that's not in the best interest of his country and the world. We know he's a brave man who could have fled, and he stayed and fought. They made movie posters about him. We know what a great guy he is. So it's interesting that he would do this because we know he's such a hero. That's the thing. Like, if I didn't know he was a hero, it wouldn't surprise me that he did this. But I know he's a hero, and I'm not allowed to question whether or not he's a hero. We have to say he's a hero. And I do. I don't question that. I'm loyal. Hey, I like having our YouTube channel. I like saying the guy's a hero. I believe that 100%, which is why it's interesting to me. It's interesting. That's all I'm saying. It's interesting.
Yeah.
That these stories don't quite match up the way they should, given what a great and noble and honest guy he is. That's all I'm saying.
Yes. So I've been saying this for a while. The Ukrainians are fucking dangerous. We need to stop listening to them. They are trying to get us into World War III. I said that before this happened. And now I don't think anyone can really argue otherwise. This is what's going on with Ukrainians. They have been bullied by Russia and other powers, but mainly Russia, for fucking centuries. Russia is the big kid who keeps beating them up and stealing their lunch money. Now they got a bigger bully to fight their bully. And they want this to go all the way. So they're going to keep saying to us, you know what he said about your mother? No, he said he could kick your ass. You know what? They're going to do everything that they can to get
Putin says your mama's so fat when she skips a meal, the stock market drops.
Oh, my God.
What are you going to do about that? You going to stand for that?
That's exactly what they're doing. I had a debate with somebody who's Ukrainian, Ukrainian American, giving so much money to Ukraine that apparently if you send them enough money, they'll put your name on a mortar and shoot a video of it and then fire it on video and send that to you. They actually had this video file. They actually streamed it. It was like talking to anyone who is working for state TV. It was actually a kind of interesting insight to me because you have these people who were dominated by the Soviet Union for so long that their mentality is the same. They think like KGB agents. So if you tell them anything that's off script or off narrative, they have a ready excuse. I brought up the Nazis in Ukraine. Oh, that's just propaganda. I was talking about the history of it. They said, well, back then, people really didn't know what the Nazis were when they joined the Nazis. This is 1943 that the Nazis went into Ukraine. They sound just like debating Russians. That's the funny thing, because the Russians will be the same way. The Russians are innocent in everything they've ever done in history, and they're a put upon victimized people. It's the same thing you'll get when you debate Ukrainians, and they will make very, very dishonest arguments. I brought up the fact that most of the American people do not want us to continue supporting this war without diplomacy. And the response was, well, that's unfortunate because they don't realize. I just hope that Putin doesn't go into Poland next and take over. They fucking know that he's not going into Poland. This is not Hitler. He doesn't have designs to take over all of Europe. How would that even happen? And they know that. This is fucking propaganda, because they know that the basis of us not just saying, hey, Russia, you good with Crimea and the Donbass? Done. The argument for us not doing that is not very strong. So they have to paint these absurd scenarios. Oh, yeah, well, if you don't help, he's going to be rolling into NATO. No, he's fucking not. No, he's not. And they'll argue every side of the issue. They were arguing to me, Russia is a third-rate military power. And then 2 seconds later, well, Russia could take over all of Europe. So which is it? Which is it? Are they a third-rate military power, or are they going to take over all of Europe? They actually argued to me about nuclear war. Most of their nukes don't work anyway. We cannot listen when they say no negotiations without Ukraine, about Ukraine, without Ukraine. Why? Why exactly? We're paying for this. We're arming them. What do you mean we can't tell them that they have to negotiate? I mean, sure, technically, and we could say, well, okay, that's going to be the end of our support. If you don't want to sit
but then
down
that's
and
the end of the war.
That's the end of our support. Right. Exactly. How do we not have that right? And certainly they have reason to hate Russia, just like a lot of our neighboring countries and semi-neighboring countries have reason to hate us.
Right.
And do.
Exactly.
And
right.
do. Like, we're not loved in most of South America and Central America. There's a fucking reason for that.
Right. Exactly. Exactly.
That is the position. Ukraine is in that position, and they have reason to feel this way about Russia. But this is not in our national interest. Not only is it not in our national interest, we have to understand that we are backing a power that does not care not only about our national interests, they don't care about the interests of the earth. One gets the sense from things like this. Look at what he did. Look at what he did.
Well, even if he didn't, even
if they didn't intentionally fire it into Poland, even if that's not the case, look at how he spun it immediately. Right.
You're doubling and tribling down on a claim that, if taken seriously, will trigger a world war. No doubt about that.
Right.
No doubt about that. And so when we say you can't stop listening to Ukraine, this does not mean, in all seriousness, for YouTube and anyone else who's listening, and it's actually what I feel. We're not blaming the Ukrainians for what was done to them, right? But what we are saying is that the way I hesitate to say info wars, but the way the propaganda wars are going now, it's very clear that, like what Russell's saying is true, that Ukraine is taking this nationalist stand where they're like, we're going to win this now if the whole world has to end for it. I'm sorry, that's not an agreeable position to the rest
Right.
of the world, and we
Right.
ought to be allowed to
Yes.
say that,
Yes.
knowing that we
Yes.
are allowed to say that. Right.
Yes. And this is why not only should we not be listening to what Ukraine has to say about how this gets resolved, they are the last fucking people we should be listening to about how this gets resolved. They are not honest actors. And if there was any question about that, this should clear that up. The fact that Zelensky continues to claim that this was Russian, that he still won't give that up. What does that tell you about Zelensky? What does that tell you about the Ukrainian government? What does that tell you about allying with these people?
Yeah.
It is
and let's just
extremely
say, look,
dangerous to us, and it's extremely dangerous to the rest of the world.
Yeah. Yeah. And what NATO said there was actually very important. And what Poland said there was very important. And, because they said, look, this was a Ukrainian stray. Now here, you want to look into this even deeper, right? You want to play the 4-dimensional chess? Let's say that Zelensky is telling the truth. Let's say it was Russian, right? Let's just say that. Isn't it then interesting that Poland and NATO are saying, no, it wasn't? Because what that signals to you, and like I said, this is reading into it perhaps further than we have to, because in all likelihood, Poland is telling the truth. NATO is telling the truth. They wouldn't lie, right? But perhaps, let's say they would. Let's say they are going to deny that it was Russian, even if it was, for the sake of averting a world war, right? Like, that could be.
Yeah,
like,
I don't think that's what happened.
I don't think that's what happened. I don't think but even if that's what, but let's say that's what did happen. Either way, what you have here, very, very plainly, no matter what the facts of this are, and it seems very likely, according to mainstream reporting, like I said, the guy was fact-checked on Twitter, okay? We're not saying anything crazy here. It seems very likely that the facts are one way. Even if the facts are the other way, it's clear that I think the rest of the world is saying, hey, wait a minute. Let's take a step back here. We don't want a world war over this. Even Biden, it was reported, had a difficult phone call with Zelensky a few weeks back where he got hostile with him. He called him an ingrate, right?
Right.
And he is a fucking ingrate.
He is.
We've sent you what? $120 billion?
Yep.
Now? We sent you a generation's worth of community college tuition here in this country. We could have put a generation to school in this country for what we have sent to Ukraine. And so Biden's right to say he's a fucking ingrate. He is.
He is.
He absolutely is. So it seems obvious to me, even the West is starting to, I think, realize that, hey, listen, this can't go on forever, and we don't want this to escalate further. Because you're even seeing, and look, the way Biden handled this from the jump was awful. We've said so a million times. But if he's starting to have enough of this guy, that tells you something.
Well, every time you see him on camera, he's trying to start World War III or he's asking for more money.
Right.
That's it. We need another $70 billion for war. Like every time you see the guy, it's like we're his father and he's coming for his fucking trust fund.
Right.
Get the fuck out of here. And then you're gonna lie or possibly false flag attack a NATO country. This is crazy, man. We should have wrapped this up last year when we could have, and Boris Johnson went over there and put the kibosh on it. And now Zelensky's all in, and he is becoming an increasingly dangerous person to be listening to. We built him up. We put him on this pedestal. In the end, he's just a fucking corrupt clown. He's a corrupt clown. He appears in the Panama Papers. He has fucking offshore accounts. He's just as corrupt as the rest of, well, maybe not as corrupt. Maybe some of them have been more corrupt. Maybe slightly less corrupt, but that's the leper with the most fingers contest. He's fucking corrupt. This was not a country that had a really stable, functioning democracy before this. The idea that that's what we're rescuing is absurd. I'm not saying the country should be allowed to be overrun by the Russians, but I'm quite certain if we called up Russia tomorrow and said, hey, man, we're going to lift the sanctions. You take Crimea.
Russia's terms were not to overrun Ukraine. Russia never wanted their flag flying over Kiev. They've never demanded that. They're still not demanding
Well, it's a pain in the ass for them, man. Then they got to occupy a hostile population. Like,
look,
come on.
What you said way at the start of this war, it was actually true, which is that this war really, from Russia's point of view, doesn't even seem to be about Ukraine. This seemed to be about forcing a conflict with the West that would force a realignment of global economic power.
Right.
That's really what it was. Right. So Ukraine is being used as a pawn by Russia just as much as it is by us.
That is the only area I was going to say that. That is the only area where I'm a little sympathetic to Zelensky's constant requests for money and support, because in the end, we're using Ukrainian lives to fight a real politics strategic game. So on that level, I feel like he has a right to ask for that money, because we're using their country as a pawn in this game of risk.
Absolutely we are. Yes. But so is Russia. Ukraine is the forum for it, not just, I mean, you could say it's World War III, it's also Cold War II, right? That's what's really going on here. What's really going on here is Russia wanted to create a conflict where certain economic powers had to take sides. They're either going to join with Russia or they're going to join with the West. That explains Russia's new partnership with China to create some new credit scheme, right? Brazil sided with Russia, India sided with Russia. They saw an opportunity here to take sort of to sort of turn a unipolar world into a multipolar world, and Ukraine was the venue for that. And that's why, we said at the very beginning, the Ukrainians have a right to defend their country. They were invaded. That's it. You have a right to defend, right?
Sure.
But to just act as if the world stops and starts with Ukraine is just maniacally selfish. I'm sorry. There are countries that have allied with Russia in the Southern Hemisphere, right underneath us. We have overthrown their governments. We have sanctioned them. We have starved their people. We have displaced their people, right? And if any of them actually went as far as to join a formal military alliance with Russia, there would be no Venezuela. If Mexico did that, there'd be no Mexico, right? And so you just have to understand, like this is why I said over and over again, this is not what about
well, South
this is
Africa,
about
I think a lot of people don't know that. I didn't know that the Soviet state supported the uprisings against apartheid at a time when we were supporting apartheid.
Right.
So that's why the current government actually feels warmly towards Russia. Russia supported them in their hour of need. We didn't.
Well, look, Putin has the benefit of being able to red pill a lot of people, when it comes to just the evils of the West. He said something about the Japanese. He said, Japan is so in the pocket of the West, they don't even teach their children about the horrors of what the United States did to them when we dropped the 2 atom bombs on them. He says, they don't even tell you about that. That's how in the pocket of Western power they are. Like, the fucking guy, he dropped some red pills just like Trump when, Trump was asked, what about Putin? Isn't he a killer? Well, we have a lot of killers over here, right? Like, there are certain people who are in positions to just speak about the West in terms that Western populations are not comfortable hearing about. And so this realignment of power obviously was not a delusion on Putin's part. He has gotten India to side with him. He's gotten China. He's gotten Brazil. These are major powers. These are major countries. Right. And that was, I think, his real goal. And of course, it's horrible and tragic for Ukraine that this happened to them. But that's why we need a peace deal. Right. We're not saying give him the whole country. Russia doesn't want the whole country. What we're saying is there are terms here that could be met that would guarantee the safety of Ukraine first and the world. So let's meet those terms. And when you have this guy here, Russia fired the missile. Even days after, every credible news outlet, all of the heads of state are saying, no, that's not what happened. He's still on this, as of a few hours ago today. I don't know. I haven't checked the phone in a few hours, but there was an article that came out this morning. He's still saying it. Yeah.
He is still making that claim. This is something about the Soviet Union I think we don't really have a lot of perspective on. And unlike some people, look, we get people who come on who are very much about, oh, the evils of communism. And, you know, personally, I'm not a communist. Keaton, maybe he's a little red, maybe, but personally, I'm not a communist. You know, I mean, what happened in Russia, I would call it Stalinism. You know, I mean, it was its own unique system. But if you ever watched the show The Americans, I thought it captured this very well, which was about, it was fictional, of two Russian spies living undercover as Americans in the United States, posing as Americans. And something it captured very well is that you have to remember, Russians didn't walk around like, yes, we are the evil empire. They had their own ideal. They had their own vision that a lot of the people, particularly the most devoted people, believed they were making a better world. They believed they were making a world where, you know, the labor is not exploited and where imperialism is not the order of the day. And, you know, you might say, well, they were the ultimate imperialist power, and they were. I mean, not the ultimate, but, you know, they absorbed all these countries that clearly didn't want to be part of the Soviet Union. But they didn't see it that way. The way that they saw it was that they were liberating these people from the capitalist system and freeing the workers from oppression. So they didn't see themselves as an imperial power. So that's something you have to remember when you look at their support for the uprising in South Africa. You know, their self-image as a nation was very tied to this vision of people who support the underdogs, who support the oppressed, who support the exploited. So it's not as simple as, you know, they were just these comic book villains, these Bond villains walking around in a frozen landscape, you know, plotting ways to undermine everything that's good in the world. They saw themselves, like all countries do, as the good guys. And a lot of the people who worked for the regime and under the regime saw themselves as fighting against iniquity. And they saw us as the leader of a system of exploitation. And just like we are not completely, we have our own idealized vision of ourselves that is not always right, and their vision wasn't always right. Our vision's not always wrong, and neither was theirs.
Please clap.